Okay, so in this video, we're going to look at the phosphorus cycle. Now, one thing I want to mention is that even though phosphorus cycles through the environment, there is no phosphorus in the atmosphere. So it's not like the carbon cycle where there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not like the nitrogen cycle where there's nitrogen in the atmosphere. The phosphorus cycle begins with rocks, and we're going to go through that in just a moment. Well, first of all, why do we need phosphorus? Well, phosphorus, if you recall, is one of the atoms that makes up the molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. In the picture here, here's a mitochondria, and through the process of cellular respiration, the mitochondria will make this molecule, adenosine triphosphate. You can see there are P's for phosphorus in the diagram. Another important molecule that requires phosphorus is DNA, and not just DNA, but RNA, nucleic acids. So here's a double helix. Now, if we look at the molecular structure of DNA, remember that DNA is made from small parts called nucleotides, and you can see the nucleotide is a sugar molecule, a nitrogen base, and then a P. The P stands for a phosphate molecule. The reason it's called phosphate is there's phosphorus in it. And one nucleotide combined with another, like you see in the picture, makes up DNA, a nucleic acid. So DNA, the genetic heredity, the genetic molecule of life, requires phosphorus. And a third reason why phosphorus is really important, in the animation here we have a phospholipid bilayer. Basically, we have the cell membrane of all of our cells. A phospholipid, phospho implies there's phosphorus in the lipids that make up the cell membrane. Well, let's go ahead and get on into the stages of the cycle now. So here we have a rain cloud, and it's raining. And so what we're going to show you is really the first stage of the phosphorus cycle. And it comes from the breaking down and the weathering of rocks. You know, rocks are just lumps of minerals, and one of the minerals that rocks are commonly made from is phosphorus. And so when it rains, phosphorus, little chips of rocks break off and crack and crumble, and this is what we mean by the weathering of rocks. And so phosphorus is released as rocks weather and break down and erode. And the phosphorus has now entered the soil. Well, once the phosphorus is in the soil, now it becomes pretty straightforward. The flowers representing the producers in this animation will absorb the phosphorus through their roots. And once the phosphorus is in the roots of plants, I hope you can figure out how animals can obtain the phosphorus. So now that the phosphorus is in the plants, the phosphorus simply moves up the food chain. In our animation, we have phosphorus going from the flowers to the snail. Well, that's because snails eat leaves and flowers and plants. In the next part of the animation, we have phosphorus going from the snail into the frog. Well, that's because frogs can eat snails. Phosphorus is simply moving up the food chain. And then we come to area 4. Represented by our mushrooms in the animation. It says decomposers will obtain phosphorus as they feed on dead remains. In the animation, there's a P coming from the flowers, there's a P coming from the snail, and there's a P coming from the frog. And they're all going to the mushrooms, representing the decomposers. I'm not implying that mushrooms hunt frogs and snails and flowers, but when frogs and snails and flowers die, their dead remains, which still contain phosphorus, are fed on by decomposers such as fungus, decomposers such as bacteria. Well, if we notice here, also there is a P coming out of the mushroom because, again, all organisms give off waste. And fungus and other decomposers will give off phosphorus in their waste. And so if you just pause and look at the animation, we have a cycle here. We have a continuous loop of phosphorus throughout the ecosystem, throughout the environment. Well, there's one little twist I want to add to this before the video is finished. We have to focus on the human contribution to the phosphorus cycle. So humans will often use fertilizers, and phosphorus is a very common ingredient as well as nitrogen. Phosphorus and nitrogen are very common to fertilizers. Well, we add fertilizers to help our crops and plants grow better. And so here we have a picture of a farmer using a tractor and pulling a trailer that is dispensing fertilizers over their crops. And so the problem with this is that the phosphorus, when it's sprayed on the crops, will often run off with rain into bodies of water. So in this picture right here, you can see that water is running off of this farm, and so often the fertilizers are simply being carried away with this rainwater here. So in my animation here we have a farmer adding peas, a bunch of peas for phosphorus. So the farmer's adding phosphorus to their crops, to the plants. And so the farmer's fertilizing the crops. Well, unfortunately, the phosphorus that's accumulating in the animation won't just stay there. Often the phosphorus is carried with weather and rain. So when it rains, often the phosphorus is simply carried downstream or downriver or down the slope of the land. And you can see in the animation the phosphorus is accumulating in this body of water. Well, this is going to lead to another problem. This often causes what are called algal blooms, an extreme growth of algae. In the animation, you see the water in the pond is turning green because of all the algae that is now being stimulated to grow from all the phosphorus. Phosphorus is a fertilizer. It stimulates the growth of algae as well as stimulating the growth of crops. Well, why is this bad? Well, first of all, before we address why is that bad, here's a couple of photographs of algal blooms. You can see this watery area just has a layer of green slime growing on it. And here we have a lake or a river that's completely been turned green because of the extreme growth of algae. Well, the problem that this causes is something called eutrophication. Often and ultimately what happens to this little body of water, it becomes a dead zone. The algae is so dense and so thick, it will often block sunlight to plants that live deeper in the water, and they start to die. Often, the next step that happens is the algae themselves will begin to die, and bacteria will feed on the dead remains of the algae. Well, the bacteria are using all of the oxygen in the water to break down and decompose the algae, that the water almost becomes oxygenless. It becomes void of oxygen because the bacteria are using it all. So therefore snails die, fish die, organisms, other animals that live in this water begin to die because there's no oxygen. The extreme growth of algae often causes the pH of the rivers and the lakes to change, and so that's another reason why the lake can become a dead zone. So the point is that the phosphorus cycle is out of balance, and human contributions are some of the reasons for that. So if you have a bit of a green thumb at home and you're interested in landscaping and gardening, perhaps you can go down to the local supply store and look for safer, non-chemical ways to perhaps fertilize your lawn and fertilize your garden. So here we go. There we go. That was the phosphorus cycle. Go ahead and pause this video. It's a very quick practice quiz, and the video is pretty quick. So go ahead and pause the video, answer these questions. If you're in my class, I'd be happy to check them for accuracy before school or after school. Good luck.